Hey everybody, welcome to Focus Interviews. The BCM is excited to provide this opportunity to sit down with local leaders and hear from them about how Christ makes a difference in their daily life and how their faith impacts their living every single week where they are. We're going to hear from University of Memphis coaches, the athletic director, ministry leaders, business professionals, and more. So thank you for tuning in, and we hope you really enjoy what you hear.
But Jeff, do we have any sponsors this week? Last week was the orange.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's all be my joke. Too,
Yeah.
Hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer. We can. There we go. It's going again.
Well, just drink your water. We'll just have to remove you from the interview for a little bit.
Well, we might have to do that. So, is that tape going to stay on the table? We can be sponsored by that.
Okay, we can be sponsored by that. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We're all matching here with our Memphis Tiger gear on right now. Jeff, nice polo.
Thanks, man. We didn't plan this, though. This is one of those things that just sort of happened, right?
Yeah.
So.
It tends to happen to me.
Yeah,
when
I know.
the 80s shows up, people wear the colors.
You
know?
got to, yeah.
That's exactly right. Give a good impression.
Right.
I'll just casually grab that Memphis Tigers flag off the wall, and I'll just say, well, I just thought I'd have this over here with me, too. Well, Laird, thank you. Sorry.
I said we just want to represent, that's all.
You know,
So.
Jeff, technically I'm the host, so when I talk.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Weston.
I was going to introduce our guests here, but you're a co-host too, so I'll let it slide.
Thanks.
Laird, thank you for joining us, man. If you don't mind, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself real quick. How long have you been here in Memphis?
I've been in Memphis right at 6 months. So I think actually today might be almost exactly my 6 month anniversary of being here and being on the job. So.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah,
Happy
it's
anniversary.
been a wild 6 months.
I bet.
Yeah.
Cotton Bowl and
Yep. Cotton Bowl had some challenges with a few things going on with the NCAA and others, and
it made you a wise man.
Yeah, right.
Sorry,
and now dealing with a pandemic on top of it, it's been busy for 6 months, but it's good. People have been super receptive. The people in Memphis have been truly awesome. They obviously love the Tigers, but they're also just real open arms, kind of very welcoming. It's been good.
Well, aside from sports, Memphis is the home of barbecue. Have you gotten any good barbecue in the past 6 months? It's probably too much.
The other thing about this job is you eat out a lot because you end up meeting with different donors, and the barbecue is really all the events, because that's like the thing that everybody caters.
The go-to,
Right. So I've actually tried to not go out to barbecue as much just because I get so much for the different events, but I love it. I grew up in Kansas, so Kansas City barbecue is a big deal. Memphis is better. I'll be clear.
Hey, that's impressive.
But I do love it. It's great.
He knows his audience is from Memphis.
That's exactly right. I was trying to think of a joke there. So you from Kansas area? Didn't you play football at Kansas State? Is that right?
Did. Yep. Yeah, I grew up in Manhattan, Kansas, where K-State is, and then played football there in the early '90s. It dates me. It makes me feel older and older when I say those things. But so the K-State football story is Bill Schneider. I don't know if you all heard about Coach, but he had just gotten there in '89, and then I was part of his first kind of full recruiting class, and came there in '90, and then we turned it around. So it was a really neat time for him. Gone literally from the worst program in the history of college football to, we were in top 20 and going to bowl games and all that, so it was a really neat experience.
He's a legend as far as that's concerned. I know there were even when I lived in Kansas, there were customized vans that were called Bill Snyder vans.
Oh yeah,
I mean, like they took him seriously, like
purple
leather and everything.
If you can name anything after Bill Snyder in Manhattan, they'll do it. That's pretty much the way it is. He earned it.
Now, when you were playing ball, what position did you play?
I played linebacker.
Inside, outside?
Mainly outside, so we played a 4-3. I played one of the two outside backers most of my career. Played a little inside my senior year. But
And did you go to high school in Kansas as well? Manhattan, Kansas?
Yeah, right there in Manhattan. Yep.
So high school football, college football, and now in sports. How long has your career been in sports? I'm not trying to date you like you said.
No. Really, all my career has been in one way, shape, or form has been in college athletics. I have moved around quite a bit, which tends to be kind of part of the profession. But and I spent about almost 7 years on the corporate side. I worked for Learfield Sports, and multimedia rights, that kind of thing. I was their general manager at Mizzou for a few years, and then I was one of the first vice presidents that oversaw as they were growing different properties, that kind of thing. But other than that, I've been working in athletic administration really ever since.
That's awesome. I bet that's exciting. And like you said, the past 6 months moving here has been probably a little chaotic, a lot of crazy, just trying to understand a new program and everything coming into. How would you describe, so you've worked in sports about all of your life. How would you describe your career in 3 words, if you could, to the best of your ability?
I appreciated the heads up on a couple of these questions, and that was the one I really appreciate, because it's one you kind of want to reflect on a little bit. So the words that came to mind were, first of all, is friendship. Just because it is very much and most professions are, but very much a people-oriented profession. Whether it's coaches, student athletes, campus folks, donors and fans, media, community. There's so many relationships that are built through it, and that's what you enjoy. It's just all the different people that you meet. Moving around the country and going to these different places, it just really quickly inserts you into every community, and it's a real easy way to kind of break the ice, because everybody wants to talk about sports. So I enjoyed that part of it. Adventure is probably the other one, because it has been an adventure that my wife and I, neither one necessarily anticipated. We knew that it would require some moving, but probably more so than what we thought, and to end up in places like Memphis, and we were in Florida, and never would have imagined we were in Florida and Texas and other places that growing up in Kansas, you don't necessarily expect to end up in some of those kind of places. So it's been a real adventure. And then blessing is the third word, because it's I've truly enjoyed it. It is challenging, and it can be stressful, and but shoot, what job isn't these days?
Exactly.
So, and you get to experience so many things in this kind of role that normally you wouldn't have the opportunity to do. Particularly at the ages that I've been able to do them, it's been remarkable. Very blessed.
That's good. Well, tell us, you mentioned your wife in this process and the adventure with her. Tell us about your wife and your kids. Just give us sort of an overview there.
Yeah. So my wife and I both grew up in Manhattan. So we grew up a block apart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was her paper boy. That's the cute little story we always like to tell. And she was actually a grade younger than me, below me, and all throughout. And she actually dated a teammate of mine who was in her class most of our high school life. And then the summer before my sophomore, her freshman year in college, we both went to K-State. We worked together at a sporting goods store, and she had broken up with her boyfriend, and so we got together, started dating, and we dated on and off through college. Then got engaged when we both were in grad school at Texas, and she jumped into this crazy life with me, and she's been my best friend, the biggest supporter, and we've been very blessed. And we have 4 children, so we have 3 teenage girls, all of whom are at home right now with the pandemic. So my oldest, who just is finishing her freshman year at K-State, came back, of course. We have a sophomore and an 8th grader, all 3 girls, and then our son, who we adopted, is 10. We adopted him when he was 2, and he's going to the campus school up here. And,
fun! Yeah,
it's been great. So.
That's awesome. That's cool. So from a young adult's perspective, because that's what this podcast is about. The name of it is, we call it The Long Run, because about the decisions. We believe young adults are obviously in an important time in their life, where the smallest to the biggest decisions you make can really change where you end up in the long run. So we want to challenge young adults to make their life count as it pertains to following Christ and not wasting your life. So I'm a young adult, so asking from the perspective, if you could share any piece of advice as it goes to following Christ within your life, your family, your work life, what's some advice that you would share to young adults?
I get the question quite a bit, just being in a college setting, and particularly being in a profession that a lot of young people want to get into. It seems, Sure. I get a lot of questions and people reaching out of how do I get involved, or if I am, the young kind of entry level type of position within a department somewhere, how do I get your job? How do I, what do I do? How do I progress? And what my typical answer is truly embracing where you're at and the moment and the people you're with, which sounds very basic, but I think proves to be really, really hard to do, particularly it seems for young people today. They're very, very driven, but there's this sort of, they want to accelerate from where they're at now to, this kind of job. And that I've been in this profession 25 years, and I've just now became an athletic director, so it takes time, and the adventure is a big part of the fun. I mean, that's, so particularly when you're in a role like this where you do move around a little bit, it can be hard to kind of embrace those kind of relationships, knowing that you likely aren't going to be there forever, right? Now the older you get and the more you get into roles like this, they tend to last longer, and you want them to. But when you're young, you're kind of moving around, so you got to just really embrace the role, the place, the people you're with, and life becomes so much more fulfilling, when you do that. And I see a lot of people sort of hold back and not be willing to deeply dive into relationships and really truly embrace whatever role they're in just as well as they can without worrying about the next one, or thinking about networking and doing all the things you do instead of just being good, whatever it is, whether that's being a professional or being a friend or a neighbor or whatever it is, just truly embracing it. Sure. I think is huge.
Reminds me of Joseph in Scripture. There's a guy who got sold into slavery by his brothers, and while he was a slave, he fully served, got promoted as a slave, got in trouble, got wrongly accused, went to jail, but even in jail, he served faithfully and became a leader in the jail, and then was remembered and went in, and when he had the opportunity, he never intended to be in front of Pharaoh, the king, but became second in command because of his faithfulness in the smallest places. So that's good. I like that, because that's what a lot of young people, young adults, sometimes they just totally miss it because they're looking beyond where they are.
Right, right. And I say that speaking from experience too, that I remember that age when I had, it was all about what's next. And I look back on that, and while I think I got to a point where I figured that out and figured out how it was sort of damaging my life and my productivity at work, etc. But I do remember that feeling and how hard it is not to, be thinking about the next thing and just embracing where you're at.
That's good.
I guess too, we're just, like you said, we're always wanting to advance. And some of the best advice I picked up on is, when you're trying to discern God's will, your purpose, your career, all those things, that's what you typically ask. It's, Lord, the first step is what I learned was, okay, Lord, I know I'm not going to get a roadmap now, and I'm not going to see every, I may want to go be, study supply chain and go into this field. But even if you don't know, walking in with a general business major, where am I going to end up? And you're asking this question to the Lord, what's next now? What's next? But then you can almost ask it too much, like you're saying. And you get caught up to where you're not looking where you're planted, and you're not owning where you're at. So that's a big piece of advice. Yeah, and I think, I look back now, and I'm glad I didn't have a roadmap. At the time, you desperately want one, but now looking back, it would have ruined it, because it is such an adventure, and there are so many things that I would have never ever guessed, or I probably would have resisted. I'm sure I would have resisted, as opposed to just allowing God to, direct your path.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask how you're talking about God directing your path. How did your relationship with Jesus begin? Sort of how did that all get started, and what was formulative in your years as far as your faith?
Yeah, so I grew up very much in a Christian household, so kind of the traditional Christian household. My folks were really poor Western Kansas farmers. So the story I like to tell there is my grandpa, so my mom's dad, actually grew up in a dugout. I don't know if you know what a dugout is, but back in the Dust Bowl, he grew up in the Dust Bowl in a dugout, which is basically a room dug out of the side of a hill. Oh, wow. So so you fast forward from there to, my mom's had a very, very blessed life, but now to where I've been, it's amazing how just one generation separated, things have changed. But so my folks were dedicated Christians. My dad actually sold life insurance for a company called, it's now Thrivent Financial. It used to be Aid Association for Lutherans. So we grew up in fairly small Lutheran church there in Manhattan, Kansas. But my dad, because he worked with Lutherans all in the region, we would spend a lot of time going to small town Christian or Lutheran churches all around the area in different way, shape, or form. So I had that upbringing, but then I really I attest my sports background, the sporting friendships, relationships, teammates, and definitely got involved with FCA at a pretty high level when I was in high school, and that's where I say my kind of personal walk really began. I had the base, but grew up more I really grew in the FCA in high school, and then some in college as well. So.
That's great. What do you have any scripture that maybe means something special to you that you'd be willing to share for young adults?
I think particularly for for this audience, I thought a little bit about that too, but one verse and Romans 12:2, which I learned as, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is his good, acceptable, and perfect will. And that's just a verse I picked up on when I was young, and that's probably been the one that I've held on to the most at different times, particularly when I have moments or decisions or challenges that sort of, the worldly view versus the Christian view, and use that as sort of a guide. But the first part of that verse to me is fairly obvious, especially for us Christians that fight that battle every day to not be conformed to the world around us. But I used to always struggle with what I kind of put that in three parts: the second and third part. And the third part, skipping to there, we used to always kind of intimidate me, the perfect part, that you can prove what is God's perfect will, but it's his will. It's not. That's the point. And when you talked earlier about kind of knowing what your path is, I think it's so important to not be conformed to the world and really live by faith in the decisions we make and the things we do, because you're never really going to know what God's will is ahead of time. But by living that way and then going through these different stages in life and the decisions we've made and the paths we've taken, you can look back on it and know and be very confident that it was God's will. The middle part of that, the renewing of your mind, I used to struggle with some too. And what I've found that to be is just that daily walk. It's the getting up in the morning and praying and reading scripture and particularly being in it with a small group of people that can help guide you. Because renewal to me is it's not something new necessarily. It's renewing. It's repeating the things you already know, but you need that constant renewal in your life, because Christianity in the worldly, in the world that we live within, is so anti everything around us. You've got to have that constant come back because of sin and the things that pull us in the other direction. So you got to have that renewal in your life, or you just can't maintain it. So that's the scripture.
I love that. That's a great passage, great verse.
As far as it goes, I would say, to your faith day to day, and I don't know if you can provide like a unique perspective with your job, and you're having to transform your mind daily, renew your mind daily, and choose to feed the spirit rather than feeding the flesh. Is there a unique perspective that you can provide from like your job where you have to do that?
I think, in a role like mine, it can be challenging at times because you have a lot of decisions you got to make, and you're also doing in a more of a secular setting, So there's times when it's just just lean in on the sort of Christian mindset, may it sometimes almost feel like you're not supposed to do that. I've actually found it, though, to be a real strength. Because, there's a lot of talk in sort of leadership about, having your core values and sticking to, doing the right things, et cetera. And some of the challenges that why that can be difficult in a setting like mine, where there's such high stakes and high pressure and the money's involved and the competitive piece and the just the visibility of it. Mm-hmm. And so there can be some things that make that difficult for people. But because of that sort of faith background, I've found it keeps your sort of true north really clear. Mm-hmm. I don't really struggle with necessarily the moral or ethical decisions as much, because I know I
Sure.
lean on that, and I've got that background. So I think it becomes a real strength, and it keeps things clear to have that. Just that faith perspective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
I like when you said true north, and part of the visibility of what we're trying to do. The graphic that Weston's been working on has a compass, mm-hmm. and right before this person is standing at the edge of a mountain about to decide where they're headed. And so I think you've really pinpointed something that I think students and young adults need to have sort of a direction of their core values, mm-hmm. about what they believe, who they follow, where their morals are based on Scripture before they enter into the world. I think one mm-hmm. of the best pieces of advice somebody gave me when I was a teenager, they said, have an answer before the question is asked. Mm-hmm. In other words, know what you believe about certain things, have standards, have convictions, have direction. It may not be that you have everything identified like the roadmap you guys are talking about, but that true north means that you already have an actual compass that's taking you where you're headed. Mm-hmm. But in the process, it's you're able to answer questions as they come because you've already established what your foundation is.
Right.
That's good.
And I have found it to be it's easier to stay consistent, and you particularly again early on as a young person in a career, you see people advance by doing things they shouldn't do, right? I mean, it happens all the time, and people advance that frankly that their ethics, their morals are not the same as yours. Mm-hmm. And so it can get frustrating, or there's times when you'll wonder, can I really get ahead if I'm not going to be cutthroat, if I'm not going to be that kind of person. And mm-hmm. Then, the value of having more years now, looking back on it, what you see is there's successes, but they tend to, rise and fall. And, just by staying consistent and being true to your heart over time, it may not happen as fast as it does for others, right. But it's a sustainable path, and it becomes something that you can maintain over a lifetime, as opposed to you see those kind of successes, but time and again they flame out in whatever way, shape, or form. Things catch up with them, and it may be over a period of years, but at some point, and then they don't have the value of being able to look back and have true pride in what they've done. They may have achieved a certain level or made a certain amount of money, but they don't, the true joy in life comes from being able to look back and know that you had an impact and that you were able to really serve and help others. Mm-hmm. And when you make decisions that are more selfish or not consistent with your values, you steal that opportunity from yourself.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good. You think about that too, non-ethical decisions to get you further, and they're not sustainable. Like you said, I thought that was good. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the compass, going off that true north. If your eyes are fixed solely on Jesus, and that's what you really got to check yourself, because you can be a Christian, you can be saved, mm-hmm. you can be teaching a life group or Sunday school class, and your eyes not be fixed on Jesus, because like you said, it's an every single day thing. Mm-hmm. And you can really measure your heart, or check the temp of your heart, however you want to say it, by what you're doing. And I think it was important, like you mentioned earlier, having those guys in your life, having people in your life, guys, girls, people the same gender in a small group with you, mm-hmm. or just guys that that are your friend, that can actually speak into your life and to keep you in check, and so you can tell them things. But coming back to that, when you think about, okay, I want to further in my career, you're talking about the more sustainable path. And it's beautiful, because if you just would be, I'm going to speak to myself, it's like, why don't I just be worried about Jesus? You know what I mean? And because Paul said to live is Christ and to die is gain. Now, I'm not saying everything is less important. Well, everything is less important, but I'm not saying everything's not important, because you still got bills to pay. You still have responsibilities that are God ordained.
Right.
But is he your King and Lord? He is your Savior, but I mean, you've heard that before. But is he your Lord, and is that who you're keeping in check with and keeping in walk with every day? I think that's a big thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the peace that comes from that is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, right.
That just being able to just to know that your life's about Christ, not about all these other things. The peace, and the confidence that comes from that is remarkable.
Yeah. And so many people, that's what they're looking for. Honestly, they're even in their attempts to get ahead, they're actually looking for peace. So, and even the verse I think about that says, "And the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and minds." And a lot of people are having anxiety, having issues in their lives related to their heart and their mind, and they, all those things are going on, but they're not thinking, how can I have peace? Well, if you back up, it says in those verses in Philippians, it says that if you don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, with prayer and petition, make your requests known to God. And that's when the peace of God will provide that unexplainable sense of confidence and peace. When you're following Christ, you're placing everything in his hands, and it's great. I joke a lot with young adults like yourself. He's single out there, ladies. But I joke a lot about people that they're trying to find a wife, or they're trying to find a husband while they're in college. And there's a verse in Scripture that says, "He that finds a wife finds a good thing." But the word "find" is this: it means it stumbles upon. That's the word. It's the original word, and it doesn't mean you're looking for it. It means you stumble upon, because your eyes are actually fixed on Jesus, and he's the one that brings peace. He's the one that brings direction. And as you're following Jesus, you'll stumble upon somebody else that's following Jesus, and it all ties in with peace. And I'm not trying to just talk about your relationships, Weston, or anything like that.
Thanks for calling me out.
Okay.
My wife would make it clear that I stumbled into her too. I didn't earn it, I'm sure.
Oh, that's no doubt. Yeah, I'm married up. Everybody that knows me knows that I'm married up.
Me too.
Out punning my coverage is what we say.
You don't have to tell us, Jeff. We know.
See.
So when it comes to you married up, or you stumbled upon with your wife and your family and your career, having to pick up, move around, what's that like? Moving churches and stuff like that. How do y'all? I'm sure you're going to say you haven't perfectly learned how to get through it, but how are you?
It's hard, really. Sure. Moving is tough. I mean, it's hard on kids. I'll kind of step back and tell a story with that. So when we 2010 would have been, our oldest daughter was 8, 9 at that point. That's when we moved from Kansas City to Manhattan, Kansas. And we were there for 7, 8 years, thinking that and frankly, that was where I grew up. My wife grew up. We were there working at Kansas State. I was at my alma mater. It was, it was kind of ridiculously, kind of nirvana in some respects. So, we thought that's where we were going to be. So, we had sort of settled into that idea. And then when that didn't happen, in terms of staying, and really the athletic director job came open, and I was the interim AD, and, thought I was going to get it, wanted to get it, and didn't. It was certainly God's will, a very, very difficult thing at the time. But we really struggled. The only thing we struggled with about, okay, what's next, and I could tell more of that story in a little bit, but was the kids, and what impact is that going to have on them? We really worried, but our oldest daughter was going into her junior year in high school, and man, there's a lot of weight we carried with that. But I can tell you the impact has been really, really positive on our kids, on our family. I think we're closer. I think it's really challenged them to mature and lean on each other and be more outgoing. And it's brought to the surface some things that I don't think we would have ever brought to the surface with our children, had we not gone through those changes to moving to Florida and then moving here. And we told ourselves that in the beginning and told people, hey, it's good for them. Then okay, it's good for them. But now we look back and we realize that it really has been. So moving is difficult, but just being grounded in faith and then finding a new church and having those people around you that support you. It also in many ways reaffirms the faith and the foundation that you got.
Yeah. What about you mentioned your daughters and your son as well, but in our conversations, we have a mutual friend named Joel Klein, and shout out if Joel watches this. He probably is going to be bored with me by now. But, Joel and I were talking, and he told me a little bit about your daughters going on mission opportunities with his church in Kansas and some stuff like that. So what have your daughters been involved in, or your family, your wife, you, and so on? Yeah,
so actually the way we first got to know Joel was my wife was a social worker on a part-time basis in Manhattan, Kansas, and Joel lives just outside of that. And they worked together. Joel was doing some work there at the hospital. So they were co-workers in a sense. And my wife, when we were in Kansas City, got connected with an organization called the Global Orphan Project, which does mission trips or vision trips, as they call them, kind of small mission trips down to now they're all over, but at that time kind of their basis was Haiti. That's where they originally got started. So where we really connected was Joel and his wife went with me and Brandy and my wife and some other friends, one kind of a couples thing down to Haiti. And that's had a huge impact on my wife, as you can imagine, because she's done several of these over the years. But then through that, our kids got to know Joel and their church and their family. Then they've gone down to mission trips down to Arlington every summer, and the
Arlington, Texas.
Texas, excuse me. And it's been a great experience. They still, even after we've moved, they find a way to save up and get there and spend that time. And it's remarkable how much they look forward to those experiences, even though they are obviously challenging in a challenging setting, and it's smoking hot outside and all that stuff. But it's really powerful in terms of impacting. Obviously, the calling of what you're trying to do there is bring Jesus to the world, but the impact on them has been tremendous too, just for their perspective, and because so many of us live in such a glorified, sheltered world. That for them to see the challenges that are out there and that what other people struggle with, I think it brings a level of humility and grace that just wouldn't be there otherwise.
Right. That kind of answers a question I had in the back of my mind. There's a lot of people that kind of have like a more small town mindset, or even small America, or just America centered mindsets. Like, why do you have to go over there? There's people here. How would you kind of spoke to it there, but how would you elaborate to that just a little bit more?
I think there's needs everywhere, and so I think you can, like us, we do like to support things in the States and abroad as well. And it's like anything else when it comes to faith, it's where you're called, and God has an amazing way of spreading the tentacles to all kinds of different places, and through those relationships He connects us, and you got to just follow that heart and see where He's leading you. But there's too much need everywhere, so I don't think it's right to neglect one over the other.
Right. It's important to be obedient, and I think that's what I like, is that a lot of times we go initially because it may be fun or whatever, but then you get there and you're sweating, or you're experiencing difficult cultures or situations, or we had a trip where several years ago where some college students went to Haiti, and they had their stuff taken from them, wallets and things like that, and they came back going, I want to go again. And you're going, okay, you just told me how terrible this trip was. They go, no, but the need is great, and God's called us to do this. And so they all have some heart for especially orphans or refugees or things of that nature. And so their calling is sometimes through the fire.
Yeah, and you really get a heart for it. And it's an incredibly humbling experience to go to Haiti and see the faith that they have. That just it crushes my faith.
Yeah.
I mean, the level of their dedication and their joy in the midst of nothingness. It's incredible to see. So you really come out of it. I think we're more affected by them than they are by us.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Laird, we talked about a lot of things. I thank you for joining us. This has been an awesome episode of the podcast, just hearing about your life and how you live out your faith and where you're at and where you're called to be. As far as young adults are concerned, we talked about, a lot of different things here, but is there a challenge that you would give to young adults as they transition out of college or they're working at this time in their life?
Just reiterating what I said, just embrace where you're at and, let enjoy the adventure. Don't try to get ahead of it, and just the seize the day thing is important, but it's not seize the day and as in let's go party every day and make the best of every moment in that way. It's just really enjoying the little things in life, and the things that I've found that have been probably the most impactful on my life, my career, my friendships is just the true ability to be in the moment with people and connect with them directly, and give them time and not be distracted by everything else around you, but just to really embrace those relationships. And that's where joy comes from, but it's also where success comes from.
Sure.
People always talk about it's not who you know, or it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it's not just who that maybe you met at a party or you met at some network event or whatever. It's who that really knows you and connects with you and trusts you, and will those are the kind of things that you find you can lean on over the years. And those only come when you're truly invested. They don't come when you're just on the surface with people. So you got to let yourself just be in the moment.
That's great.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you have anything?
Man, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, it really helps me think about the fact that a lot of students probably miss out on a lot of things because they're trying to think, if I could only do this, or I wish I could hurry up and graduate, or I wish I could go ahead and meet somebody, or, all the different things that we try to rush through or gain, and we don't just enjoy where we are in the process. And I hate to be corny, but there's a movie called Parenthood with Steve Martin a long time ago. And there's a part in the end where he's talking about, he's just overwhelmed with everything that's going on in his life with his kids and his wife and his family and all these kinds of things. And, you hear roller coaster sounds in the background. And he said, he was talking to his mother-in-law, who's just old and senior adult type mindset. And she said, I people love the merry-go-round at the parks, but I like the roller coasters. And then she walked out, and he goes, she's so weird. And his wife said, that's the smartest lady I've ever seen. And it's because she goes, the merry-go-rounds are consistently just, what to expect, and so you don't go outside of what's normal. Roller coaster, you're scared to death. The adventure is there, but that's where it is with God, is when we walk with God, we're never sure what's next, but if we trust him, we'll get off the ride and we'll go, let's do that again, And so I think there's wisdom in being all in through the downs and the ups, trusting God all the way through.
That's where that's where you see his hand.
That's exactly
you look
right.
back after you're not going to necessarily see it before, and
that's
he does.
Right.
He wants you to live in faith.
Yeah.
But it's incredible the joy that comes from being able to live in it and embrace it, and then be able to look back and see where his hand was.
That's faith. Yeah, that's good.
It's a lot of great advice, and being the young adult at the table, I feel like it's all pointed towards me, which it is. So I'm taking mental notes here. I'm just like, hey, I may be guilty of that this morning. God, I'm ready to get out of Memphis. But But Laird, thank you for coming out, man.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody that's been listening to the podcast and listening and tuning into this episode. You can find more of our episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcast. And if you don't have access to those, you can go to thelongrunpodcast.org. And if you have any other topics or questions or people you'd like to hear from, feel free to shoot us a message. We'll see you next week.